Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. In the distant future, humanity had established itself as a dominant force in the Milky Way, spreading its influence across countless star systems. The Galactic Empire, as it was known, was a vast and powerful entity, stretching from the core worlds to the outermost colonies. It was a time of technological marvels and unimaginable wealth, but also a period fraught with tension, both from external alien threats and internal factions vying for control. Elias Kane was an ordinary man, or so it seemed. In his late 30s, he was a mid-level engineer stationed on Arcturus IV, a crucial hub for the Empire's communication and transportation networks. He was known for his diligence, precision, and an uncanny ability to solve complex problems, but beyond his work, he was largely invisible, a quiet figure who preferred the solitude of his quarters to the bustling social life of the station. Elias's work was essential, though often overlooked by those in power. He maintained the warp gate systems, the lifelines of the Empire that allowed for instantaneous travel across the vast distances of space. Without these gates, the Empire would fracture, its far-flung colonies and military outposts isolated and vulnerable. Yet, despite the importance of his work, Elias had no ambitions beyond his station, no desire for recognition or advancement. He was content in his anonymity, believing that his small contributions were enough, but all of that would change on a day that began like any other. As Elias conducted a routine system check, his sharp eyes caught something unusual, a minor anomaly in the data streams of the warp gates. At first, he thought it was a simple glitch, perhaps a result of solar interference or a minor malfunction. But as he dug deeper, his curiosity piqued. He found something far more disturbing. The anomaly wasn't random, it was deliberate. Elias's heart raced as he uncovered encrypted communications buried deep within the system. The messages were brief, coded, and exchanged between high-ranking officials within the Empire. They spoke of an impending event, a plan that could destabilize the entire galactic empire. The words were vague, but the implications were clear. A conspiracy was brewing, one that threatened the very foundation of the Empire. For a moment, Elias hesitated. He was just an engineer, a man who had spent his life in the shadows, content to let others shape the fate of the galaxy. Reporting this could bring unwanted attention, could make him a target. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized the gravity of the situation. If this conspiracy was real, if it succeeded, countless lives would be at risk. The Empire could fall into chaos, torn apart by internal strife. Elias knew he couldn't ignore it. But he also knew that simply reporting his findings might not be enough. He needed to understand the full extent of the plot, to gather more evidence before he could act. And so, with a resolve that surprised even him, Elias began his investigation. He worked in secret, accessing the systems late at night when the station was quiet, and the only sounds were the hum of machinery and the distant thrumming of the warp gates. His skills as an engineer allowed him to navigate the complex data networks, tracing the encrypted communications to their sources. The more he uncovered, the more dangerous the conspiracy seemed. The messages led him to various key locations across the Empire, military outposts, government facilities, even private corporations. The conspiracy was vast, involving powerful figures who were dissatisfied with the current leadership. They were planning a coup, a simultaneous strike on loyalist strongholds using the warp gates to coordinate their forces. If they succeeded, the Empire would be theirs. As Elias delved deeper, the danger grew. He encountered security systems designed to keep out even the most skilled hackers, loyalists who would do anything to protect the conspiracy, and mercenaries hired to silence anyone who got too close. There were close calls, moments when Elias thought he had been discovered, when he had to erase his tracks and disappear into the shadows. But he pressed on, driven by a newfound sense of purpose. He couldn't let the empire fall, not if there was something he could do to stop it. One night, after weeks of careful investigation, Elias finally discovered the heart of the conspiracy. The encrypted communications had led him to a remote moon, an industrial wasteland where the conspirators had gathered for a covert meeting. Disguised as a maintenance worker and using his technical expertise, Elias infiltrated the facility, his heart pounding with every step. Inside, he found them, high-ranking military officers, corporate executives, and politicians, all gathered around a holographic display. They spoke in hushed tones, discussing their plans with a cold, calculating precision. Elias recorded everything, gathering the evidence he needed to expose them. But just as he was about to leave, disaster struck. One of the conspirators noticed something amiss, a door left slightly ajar, a tool out of place. Suspicion flared, and within moments, Elias found himself discovered. Panic surged through him, but years of working in dangerous environments had honed his instincts. He bolted, darting through the industrial complex as alarms blared and armed guards gave chase. The chase was intense, a deadly game of cat and mouse through the twisting corridors and massive machinery of the facility. Elias used every trick he knew, rerouting power, locking doors behind him, and using the facility's layout to his advantage. But his pursuers were relentless, and he could feel the net closing in. Finally, battered and bleeding, Elias reached the edge of the complex. With no other options, he activated a maintenance shuttle and blasted off, the facility's defenses firing after him. The shuttle was a rickety old thing, not meant for combat, but it was fast enough to get him out of range before the conspirators could stop him. Safe, for now, Elias set course for the nearest Imperial fleet outpost. He had the evidence, but he knew he couldn't trust anyone. The conspiracy reached into the highest levels of the empire, and any misstep could mean his death. But he had no choice. He had to act, and quickly. When he arrived at the outpost, Elias contacted an old friend, someone he knew he could trust, Captain Arya Voss, a high-ranking officer in the Imperial fleet. Years ago, they had worked together on a project to upgrade the fleet's communication systems, and he knew she was as loyal to the Empire as he was. Using a secure channel, Elias told Arya everything. He showed her the evidence, the recordings, the data he had gathered. At first, she was skeptical. It all seemed too far-fetched, too unbelievable. But as Elias laid out the details, she began to understand the gravity of the situation. The Empire was on the brink of a civil war, and only they could stop it. Arya acted quickly. She contacted a small group of trusted officers, and together they devised a plan to counter the coup. The conspirators were already moving their forces into position, using the warp gates to coordinate their attack. But Elias knew the system better than anyone. He had designed many of the security protocols himself, and he knew how to disrupt them. The plan was simple but dangerous. Elias would take control of the central warp gate hub on Arcturus IV, the most important node in the entire network. From there, he could reroute the gates, sending the rebel forces to isolated sectors where they could be picked off by loyalist fleets. It was a risky move. If he was caught, the conspirators would win. But it was the only chance they had. With Arya's help, Elias returned to Arcturus IV. The station was quiet when he arrived, the night shift workers unaware of the storm about to break. Elias made his way to the control center, his heart pounding with anticipation. He knew every inch of this station, every system and circuit, and he used that knowledge to his advantage. As he accessed the central computer, Elias felt a strange sense of calm. He was in his element, surrounded by the familiar hum of machinery, the flicker of holographic displays. He had spent years working in the shadows, unnoticed, unappreciated. But now, in this moment, he realized that everything had led to this. With swift, precise movements, Elias began rerouting the warp gates. He sent false signals, tricking the rebel fleets into thinking they were jumping to key targets when, in fact, they were being scattered across the galaxy. Loyalist forces, tipped off by Arya, were waiting for them at every turn, but the conspirators weren't fools. As they realized what was happening, they struck back, launching a cyber attack on the station's systems. The control center was suddenly a battlefield, alarms blaring, screens flashing with warnings as the rebels tried to wrest control from Elias. It was a duel in the digital realm, a clash of minds and machines. Elias fought with everything he had, his fingers flying over the controls, his mind racing to stay ahead of the attackers. He rerouted power, shut down systems, and opened backdoors he had built years ago, never thinking he'd need them. The tension was unbearable, but Elias refused to give in. He was no soldier, no hero, but he had something the conspirators didn't: a deep, intimate knowledge of the system, and a determination to protect the Empire at all costs. Sweat dripped down his face as he fought to maintain control, his vision blurring from exhaustion. Just when it seemed like the rebels might overwhelm him, a message flashed on his screen, a signal from Arya. The Loyalist fleets had engaged the enemy, and the battle was turning in their favor. The conspirators were being crushed, their fleets isolated and vulnerable, unable to regroup. Elias felt a surge of relief, but he knew it wasn't over yet. He had to lock down the warp gates, seal the network to prevent any last-ditch escape attempts. With a final burst of energy, he activated the lockdown protocol, severing the gates from the control of the rebels. The screen went dark for a moment, then lit up with a single message: network secure. Elias collapsed back in his chair, his body trembling with fatigue. He had done it. The coup had been stopped, the Empire saved from destruction. But there would be no celebration, no medals or accolades. The victory had been won in the shadows, by a man who would remain nameless, his deeds unknown. In the aftermath, the Empire was shaken but stood firm. The conspirators were rounded up, their plans exposed, and their influence purged from the military. Arya and her loyalists ensured that justice was served, though they never revealed the full extent of Elias's role in the victory. It was better that way, they agreed. The Empire needed stability, not heroes. As for Elias, he returned to his life as an engineer on Arcturus IV. The days that followed were quiet, almost surreal after the chaos of the coup. He resumed his work, maintaining the warp gates, ensuring that the lifelines of the Empire remained strong. But something had changed in him. He no longer felt invisible, no longer a mere cog in the machine. He had seen the darkness within the Empire, had fought it, and won. And though he would never be recognized for his deeds, he knew that he had made a difference. That knowledge was enough. One evening, as Elias sat alone in his quarters, he received a message, a simple text from Arya, thanking him for his help. It was brief, no more than a few words, but it meant the world to him. He smiled, feeling a warmth in his chest that he hadn't felt in years. Elias Kane, the nameless hero of the Galactic Empire, returned to his work, content in the knowledge that he had done his part. The galaxy was safe, at least for now, and he would continue to protect it in his own quiet way, from the shadows. And so, the story of the nameless hero comes to an end, not with a grand parade or a public celebration, but with the quiet satisfaction of a job well done, the Empire secure for another day. Elias Kane returned to his usual routine on Arcturus IV, but everything felt different now. The quiet hum of the station, the rhythmic pulse of the warp gates, even the mundane reports he filed each day, these were all the same, yet they seemed infused with a new sense of purpose. He had always been a man who preferred the comfort of routine, but now he saw the world with clearer eyes. He had glimpsed the dark undercurrents running beneath the Empire's polished surface and had played a crucial role in protecting it, even if no one else knew. The Empire, still recovering from the attempted coup, carried on with its daily operations. The public remained largely unaware of how close they had come to disaster, and the newsfeed spoke only of routine military maneuvers and the steady progress of imperial projects across the galaxy. Behind the scenes, however, those who had taken part in the conspiracy were quietly removed from their positions, replaced by loyalists who ensured the stability of the regime. Elias's role in all of this remained a closely guarded secret. Arya Voss, now promoted and with even greater responsibilities, made sure of it. She and Elias exchanged a few brief messages over the weeks that followed, each one reminding him that his efforts had not been forgotten, even if they remained in the shadows. As time passed, Elias found himself thinking more about what had transpired. He had always been content to live a quiet life, to do his part without drawing attention. But after everything that had happened, he couldn't shake the feeling that he had been changed by the experience. He had seen what was at stake, and he had risen to the challenge, something he never would have thought possible before. One day, while performing routine maintenance on one of the warp gate control panels, Elias noticed a young technician struggling with a complex repair. The technician, barely out of training, was clearly frustrated, and Elias could see that they were about to make a mistake that could disrupt the entire system. Without a second thought, Elias stepped in, his hands moving deftly to correct the issue. "Thanks," the technician muttered, clearly embarrassed. "I thought I had it, but this system is more complicated than the simulations." Elias nodded, giving the younger man a reassuring smile. "These systems have their quirks. You'll get the hang of it with time. Just remember to trust your instincts and never be afraid to ask for help." The technician looked up at him, clearly surprised. "I didn't think someone at your level would still be doing hands-on work. Most of the senior engineers just oversee things." Elias shrugged. "I've always believed that it's important to stay connected to the work, to understand every detail of the systems we rely on. It keeps you sharp and reminds you of why we're here." The technician nodded thoughtfully, clearly taking Elias's words to heart. As he walked away, Elias couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. He had spent years in the background, unnoticed and unappreciated, but now he realized that his work, even the small, seemingly insignificant moments, mattered. Every task he performed, every problem he solved, contributed to the greater good of the Empire. Weeks turned into months, and life on Arcturus continued much as it always had. The station was a vital hub in the Empire's infrastructure, and there was always work to be done. But Elias noticed something different in himself. He was more aware, more attuned to the subtle shifts in the atmosphere around him. He had developed a sense for when things weren't quite right, a skill honed during his investigation into the conspiracy. And though the station remained largely peaceful, Elias could never entirely shake the feeling that another crisis could arise at any moment. It was late one evening, during one of his solitary walks through the station's quieter corridors, that Elias's instincts once again alerted him to something amiss. The station was never truly silent, but tonight the usual background noises seemed off, like a melody played slightly out of tune. He paused, listening carefully, his eyes scanning the shadows for anything out of place. As he rounded a corner, Elias noticed a figure hunched over one of the access panels. The figure was dressed in a maintenance uniform, but their movements were furtive, almost nervous. Something about the scene didn't sit right with Elias, and he quietly approached, keeping to the shadows until he was close enough to see what the person was doing. To his surprise, he saw that they were attempting to bypass the security protocols on the panel, rerouting power from one of the auxiliary systems. It was an unusual procedure, one that could disrupt the station's operations if done improperly. Elias's mind raced. Could this be another attempt to sabotage the Empire? Was this a remnant of the conspiracy he had helped to thwart? Can I help you with something? Elias's voice was calm but firm as he stepped into the light, startling the figure. The person jumped, turning quickly to face Elias. It was a young woman, probably in her mid-20s, with a look of panic in her eyes. I was just performing routine maintenance, she stammered, clearly flustered. Elias didn't believe her for a second. Routine maintenance doesn't involve bypassing security protocols without authorization. Who are you, and what are you doing here? The woman's eyes darted around, clearly searching for an escape route, but Elias blocked her path. She was trapped, and she knew it. With a sigh, she seemed to deflate, the fight leaving her as she realized there was no way out. My name is Lyra, she admitted quietly. I'm with the Resistance. Elias raised an eyebrow. Resistance? Against the Empire? Lyra nodded, her expression resolute despite her fear. I'm not part of the original conspiracy you uncovered, but there are others who believe the Empire needs to change, who think the corruption goes deeper than you realize. Elias felt a chill run down his spine. He had thought the conspiracy was over, that the threat had been dealt with. But here was proof that unrest still simmered beneath the surface, that others were plotting in the shadows, just as the original conspirators had. What were you planning to do? Elias asked, his voice steady even as his mind raced through the possibilities. Lyra hesitated, then met his gaze with surprising honesty. I was going to disrupt the warp gate systems, create chaos that would draw attention to our cause. We believe that only through drastic action can we force the changes that are needed. Elias studied her for a long moment. She was young, passionate, and clearly believed in what she was doing. But her plan was reckless, and the consequences could be catastrophic. He could see that she was convinced she was doing the right thing, but Elias also knew the destruction and suffering that would follow if she succeeded. Lyra, he began, choosing his words carefully, I understand that you believe in your cause, but this isn't the way to bring about change. All you'll accomplish is hurting innocent people, causing the kind of chaos that could tear the Empire apart. Her expression wavered, doubt creeping into her eyes. But what choice do we have? The Empire is corrupt, and those in power won't listen to us. Elias sighed, remembering the weight of the responsibility he had carried during the coup. There's always a choice. You can work from within, find allies who share your views, and push for change through the proper channels. I've seen what happens when people try to force change through violence and subversion. It only leads to more suffering. Lyra looked down, clearly conflicted. Elias could see the struggle within her, the war between her convictions and the reality of what she was planning. Finally, she sighed and stepped back from the panel. You're right, she admitted. I don't want to hurt anyone, but I didn't know what else to do. Elias nodded, feeling a sense of relief. We'll find another way, one that doesn't involve causing harm. But first, we need to make sure this station remains secure. He reached out, deactivating the changes she had made to the panel and restoring the system to its normal operation. As he worked, he couldn't help but feel a sense of déjà vu. Once again, he was navigating the shadows, preventing a disaster that few would ever know about. When he was finished, he turned back to Lyra. I'm going to report this, but I'll make sure it's handled quietly. There's no need to escalate things further. Lyra nodded, her expression one of gratitude and resignation. Thank you, Elias. I didn't expect someone like you to understand. Elias offered her a small smile. I've seen more than you might think. Just remember, there's always another way. As Lyra was escorted away by station security, Elias felt a strange mix of emotions. He had once again prevented a crisis, but this time it wasn't just about saving the Empire, it was about guiding someone who was lost, helping them find a better path. It was a reminder that the battles fought in the shadows weren't always against enemies, sometimes, they were against the darkness within ourselves. Elias returned to his quarters that night, the events of the day weighing on his mind. The Empire was stable for now, but he knew that unrest would always be lurking beneath the surface, that there would always be those who sought to challenge the status quo. But as long as there were people willing to stand up and do what was right, there was hope. He sat down at his desk, pulling up the latest system reports. The work never ended, but that was okay. Elias had found his purpose, his place in the grand scheme of things. He was the nameless hero, the one who worked in the shadows to keep the Empire safe, and that was enough. As he reviewed the reports, a message notification blinked on his screen. It was from Arya, a simple note thanking him for his continued efforts and reminding him that his work was appreciated, even if it wasn't acknowledged publicly. Elias smiled to himself as he read the message. He didn't need public recognition or accolades, he had found something far more valuable. He had found his place, his purpose, and the knowledge that he was making a difference, even in the smallest of ways, and so, Elias Kane continued his work, quietly ensuring the stability and safety of the Empire. The galaxy was vast, filled with countless dangers and challenges, but Elias knew that as long as he was there, watching over the warp gates and the systems that held the Empire together, the future was secure. The story of Elias Kane, the nameless hero, was not one that would be told in history books or celebrated in public ceremonies. It was a story of quiet dedication, of unseen battles fought in the shadows, and of a man who found his purpose not in glory, but in service. And for Elias, that was more than enough.